disclaimer before we get into it. This comic is already available on my webtoon, Tapas, and my website. So if you don't want to get spoiled by anything, feel free to read it before watching this video talking about the process. So yeah. Hello everybody, it's your non-binary pal E.V.A here, and that's right, I did it again! I made a comic in one single month because I might be a masochist. This all started earlier this year when I heard about a comic contest that was being hosted by Clip Studio Paint and Pixiv. And before you ask, no, I did not win, but that's okay because now I can talk about the process. I actually heard about this contest a couple months before the deadline, but it took me so long to decide what I wanted the story to be that I ended up only having a month left. But luckily for me, I've been down this road before, so I wasn't that stressed out. Only a little bit. By the way, if you're curious what I'm talking about, last year I made a video about a manga that I actually drew in 1 month. This time it's a whole fully colored comic, so yeah. But let's go ahead and start talking about it. The story I did eventually choose to do is a story that at this point was only in my head for a couple of months. But since I was pretty hyper-fixated on it, it ended up being the winner. Plus, I had actually been writing the script for it in advance. The story is about 2 characters that I had actually made for last year's Strawtober that actually Ray made. The final prompt was Anomaly, and I made a sort of Beauty and the Beast type pairing where one is this beautiful person and the other is a cryptid straight out of the works of the 2010s. But they're a sweetheart deep down, and the 2 of them have a loving relationship. Actually, I had made a single-page comic for them for this challenge back then, so I was already somewhat familiar drawing them in this format. However, these designs were definitely first drafts, and I wanted to redesign them and give them more of a solid premise before working on this. For the human, I decided to make them a witch, because I realized that I had not made a witch character before, and I kept a lot of the same elements of their original design, like their hair shape, colors, outfit layout, and this flower. I adjusted the outfit, gave them a witch hat and a staff, with the flowers both being in their hat and staff. And I also kept the blind eye and scar from the original design for some extra flavor. And since they had a very flowery theme, I gave them the name Wisteria. Wisteria is a non-binary witch who lives in a lone cottage in the woods and specializes in potions. They are super gentle and kind and are a fantastic judge of character. They are also very protective and supportive. I decided to draw the Anomaly character in the same red sheet for ease, and I decided to go with a completely different shape language for their design. They initially had this really sad, hunched over appearance, but I wanted them to appear more mysterious, so I drew them super tall with long limbs like I did before, and lots of sharpness. But I actually wanted them to look a bit like a tree, so I drew these branch shapes all over them, including in their horns, and some leaves. I left them completely monochromatic except for their eyes and markings, which were yellow. And for their face, I made them much simpler with just big round eyes being partially covered by long hair. I think this version of the design suits this version of the character more, less sad feeling. Originally, I had given them the name Creek, but due to the nature of their design and a certain Minecraft update that had just come out, I figured that would be a bad idea, so I went with the name Grim instead. Grim is a very mysterious entity that was created by the forest, and they are unsure why they were created, but they are very gentle with everyone and everything. Even though most people fear them, Wisteria doesn't, and Grim feels the most comfortable around them and loves whenever they come to visit. Now for the script, I actually wrote it all in my notebook, along with some rough concept sketches, which I'll show here. It was my first time writing a script this way, and it probably led to a few more spelling errors than I probably would have liked, but I liked the process overall. Before working on the pages themselves, I did some work for the background. I talked about this in my videos about gateways, but I came up with this process that made working on the pages themselves a lot easier, which is to design and render all the pages separately, export them as pages, and then import and arrange them in a page when needed. This is the project I first discovered this on since I was on a really short deadline and needed to find a way to decrease the amount of work I would need to do on each page. It also allows me to create a unique design for the background. I found this really nice purple, blue, and green color palette to work with, and for the trees, I made them look like wisteria trees. I'd actually gathered a bunch of references for the background, probably more so than the actual characters, but it was definitely worth the time and effort to get these to look good, like once, and then I could just reuse them over and over. I'd also found a bunch of brushes that would help me here, and I still use those in my other projects. If I can, I'll show which brushes I used here. Now, this method does work really well for nature backgrounds, but I still haven't found a good way to incorporate this for architectural backgrounds, and the first 2 pages have Wisteria's cottage in it. I was able to design the outside of the cottage separately, but for the other one, I had to draw the interior of the house manually, This wasn't a big deal though, since it would be the only background I would have to spend more time on. And for the house, I kept it within the same color palette. I drew some like foliage on the outside and some lanterns, and yeah, kept it very magical feeling. And on the inside too, I also added a little bit of foliage and stuff. I'm not the biggest fan of how the foliage looks on the inside though. I think it was because of the brushes I used, but that's okay. It was really simple and I needed it to be done. But yeah, the whole background was meant to have a super magical feeling to it, and I think it works pretty well. I think the green especially makes it look really nice. I think the cool green just matches perfectly with the vibe of all of this. So yeah, for drawing the characters, I actually used the exact same style that I did for that one-page comic that I made back in October, using this sketchy brush for the line art and using this chunky brush for shading that I love to use anyway. I used vector lines so that I could keep the sketches as just simple anatomy, and I could just focus on all the details with the line art, and I could squash and stretch it however I need to without it looking really blurry and messed up. Although I do have a trick that I've discovered if you do need to do this, but on a raster layer. If you're working with a raster layer with like liner or anything, but you need to make an adjustment that you know will make it look super blurry, if you're working in Clip Studio Paint, there's this option called Sharpen that's under the filter section. If you use that, you can actually adjust it to be more sharper and get rid of that blurriness. You don't want to use too much. That will make it look a bit like more pixelated and crunchy, but I find this works really well, especially with the style of line art that I usually use, which is more messy and pixelated already. So yeah, in Ibis Paint, it also kind of has a feature like this called Unsharp Mask. It doesn't have like the exact same effect as the one in Clip Studio, but it's pretty similar, so I do that there as well. So yeah, quick tip if you also need to do this sort of method, but accidentally make a raster layer, which I've done before. I've done that plenty of times. I will want to make a vector layer, but I drew the whole thing on a raster layer accidentally and need to adjust some things. So yeah, quick and simple way to do that. I actually have a shortcut key set to that. This also allowed me to copy and paste whenever I could, like a certain angle or something that like was very similar to another page. I could just copy and paste it over, scale it down if I need to, and yeah, that also made things go by a lot quicker. And I do this whole process in my other comics these days too. It just makes everything a lot easier. And sketching was always like my least favorite part of drawing comics anyway. I use the same colors throughout for shading, except for a part towards where Wisteria runs into Grim. I wanted the forest to turn to saturated with some yellow lights to give their first appearance, a spooky vibe, but then have a transition back to the bright colors. I did this to sort of like trick the reader a little bit to thinking that, oh, this is going to be a scary entity, but then it turns out it's not, and it's all good. So yeah, wanted to do some trickery there, and I think I pulled it off well. I actually just used the same exact background elements that I'd made before, and I just desaturated them, used the little saturation slider, scrolled it down, and then just used an airbrush to create some yellow lights randomly in the trees. Some other things I came across while drawing this were figuring out how to draw Wisteria's magic at some point. They do use it, and I kept it to just being simple light lines. If I had a bit more time, I probably would have just like figured out a bit more what their magic would look like, but this is what I came up with for the time. Drawing their hat was really hard to do without making it look weird. I barely ever give my characters hats, and this is why. I could have not given them one, but it felt so crucial to not only their silhouette, but also the fact that they're a witch that I just tried to push through. A detail I really wanted to include was Grimm's facial expressions. For the most part, they just have this long, blank stare, but when they're really happy or really sad, I drew their eye more squiggly and added more highlights to give it more emotion. I've always loved designs that don't have all the standard facial features humans have, so you have to get creative with how to express different emotions. So I was happy to be able to do that here, and I was actually part of the reason why I gave them like less facial features than when they had in their first design, so I could play around with this. For this flower, which is important to the story, I made this simple circular design with a swirl in the center, and the colors purple, yellow, and green. It's supposed to be a representation of both of the characters, in case that wasn't obvious. And for the final page, after the happy ending, I wanted to draw this silly doodle of Wisteria and Grimm having dinner and chatting, and I also figured it would be cool if Grimm did some drawing, just to add some more into their character. And I also made these little info pages, and that was it for the main pages. Now, this was the cover I made initially, and it really sucks. I was running out of steam for this project and just wanted to make something simple, but it sucks so much that I'm redrawing it for this video, and this is what I'm showing now. So for this artwork, I wanted to draw them as if they were looking for the flower. That's kind of the first composition that came to mind, and I sort of just went with that, and I went with the scene of them like looking over a bush of some sort, which ended up making things a little easier because I pretty much ended up only having to draw half of them, so not as much to draw, but still a bit. Drawing them was actually surprisingly easy at this point. It had actually been like a good few months. I finished the comic in March or April, I think it was March, and then just now in September that I drew this. So yeah, quite a bit of a difference there, a few months without drawing them at all. So yeah, it turned out fairly easy. And for the artwork, after I was done with the sketch, I used a lot of the same brushes that I used for the comic. I used the same line art tool to make things look more consistent. And yeah, once I was done with the line art and filling in the characters' colors, or I might have actually done this in the sketching first, I don't remember, but I did put in the background, and then yeah, the same background assets that I used, which I still have and are still helpful here. I did have to redraw the foliage though. I had a little thing for like foliage, but that was more for like far back shots, and just did not work for a foreground here, so I had to redraw it, and I decided to use a different brush too, so it would be more solid. And yeah, instead of cell shading the characters, I just used a hard light layer, like my little underpainting technique, but more solid as if it was cell shading. And yeah, just did that, and I like how it looks. Might end up doing, well, I don't know, I'm not sure. I like it here, but I don't know if I'll do that in all of my works. But yeah, rest of the rendering was normal aside from that step that I decided to take. I did render the eyes a little bit differently. For Grimm's eyes, I actually used the same technique that I used within the comic itself, which is just like to shade it within like the same hard light layer and then like blur it out a little bit. It's cool. I like doing that because it added more depth. For Wisteria though, because their eyes are quite a bit different, they don't have like pupils in their eyes, I just went with the I shaded it like how I normally would, but except for the parts that I usually do when focusing on the pupil. And then I also added more of like a multiply outline around the whole eye, especially around the eye whites, because of how light their eye color is. And I've been actually thinking about doing that more in my normal artworks, because even though I do try to lower it down, the eyes can still get a little bit bright with how much add glow layers I put on it, and then the white highlights tend to blend in more. So that might actually just be something I do too, just to make those pop out more. For the whole rendering process, I used purple for the shading, obviously, and then used a combination of pink and yellow. I meant to use turquoise at some point, but I ended up not doing that, but I don't think it really needed that here. And then for the foreground, I added in these like little, I call them like little fairy lights, but they're not called that. But yeah, just little like circular dots around, just like in the comic. And yeah, towards the end too, I also had to put in the title, and I actually forgot what I had named this. So I had to bring up the old cover to get the title and then add that in as well. And luckily, I did have quite a bit of room on the top and bottom to add the title. I made this mistake with the Gateways cover too. Always keep in mind how much room you have for your titles. Don't be like me. I did not do this here or on my Gateways title. On the Gateways one, that ended up being a big mistake and I had to fix that, but for this one, it worked out fine. But don't do that. Always have in mind when you're doing a comic cover where the title is going to be. I should actually probably just get in the habit of like sketching it in directly, but I never do, so well. But that was it for the redo of this cover. I'm much happier with it than the other one. It's still not like what I would consider like a fully finished piece, but it's good for a one shot comic. It matches the vibe of it, so yeah, I liked it quite a bit. And with that was everything. This comic is now available on Webtoon, Tapas, and my website, so feel free to check it out if you're interested. If you're a Patreon supporter, then you've already seen this since I posted it there early, and you can see some other early stuff, including updates to my longer comics on my Patreon if you want to support me there. But no worries if you can't. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I know this wasn't as long or as in-depth as my last one talking about my manga, but it was because that one was more talking about like how I needed to create a whole new process for something I've never done before, which is create a manga. But because this was about a comic, which I've talked about plenty of times on my channel, I didn't have too much else to talk about other than the story and the characters and how different it was. But yeah, since this was about a witch and a spooky character, I thought it would be perfect for the spooky month. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. And yeah, I will see you in the next video. Bye!